Tell Us About Yourself is sponsored by bonusround.ca, streaming Canada's classic game shows on demand. Dive into the golden age of television with thousands of episodes of Canadian series that defined an era from anywhere in the world, all for just $1.99 a month. From iconic shows like Let's Make a Deal and Definition to cult classics like Bumper Stumpers and The Mad Dash, bonusround.ca brings you timeless entertainment that's fun, enlightening, and affordable. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, relive the magic of Canadian television history. Subscribe now at bonusround.ca for $1.99 and turn every night into game show night. And by The Inn at Leola Village. Nestled in the heart of picturesque Pennsylvania, the Inn at Leola Village is a sanctuary of luxury and relaxation. Indulge in the timeless beauty of their historic suites, each meticulously designed to transport you to a bygone era of elegance and grace. Experience the culinary delights of their award-winning Italian restaurant, where every dish is a masterpiece crafted from the finest local ingredients. From romantic getaways to corporate retreats, the Inn at Leola Village offers a haven for every occasion. Unwind at the spa, stroll through the lush gardens, and let the stress of everyday life melt away. Make your reservation today at theinnatleolavillage.com or call the front desk at area code 717-656-7002. The Inn at Leola Village, an oasis of luxury. Tell Us About Yourself, Conversations with Game Show Contestants is produced in partnership with the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, one of the largest history museums in the United States, and one of the leading museums serving families with highly interactive exhibits and programs. Since 1968, the Strong Museum has been dedicated to exploring the ways in which play encourages learning, creativity, and discovery, and how it illuminates cultural history. And their National Archives of Game Show History. Founded by industry veterans Bob Bowden and Howard Blumenthal, the archive is home to thousands of artifacts representing over 80 years of broadcasting, including props, set designs, video interviews with game show professionals, and other iconic elements from the history of television at play. For more information about the National Archives of Game Show History or the Strong National Museum of Play, visit museumofplay.org or call area code 585-263-2700.
Blue 35.
Tell us about yourself, would you?
Tell us something about you.
For any new viewers, why don't you tell us again about yourself?
We've met before, but let's meet again. Tell us about yourself.
What else can you tell us about yourself?
Perhaps you'd fill us in again and tell us about yourself.
Come on out! You are our Mental Samurai Grand Champion! Yeah! Congratulations!
I did it!
You did it!
I did it!
How do you feel?
Incredible! I'm thrilled. I can't take it in. It's amazing.
Well, with what you won tonight, $250,000 just now, your previous winnings, it's $300,000. And you are our first Mental Samurai Grand Champion. Put it
Hi, my name is Heather Hurley. I'm from Arlington, Virginia, and I work for the federal government as a program analyst at the National Science Foundation.
Are you originally from Virginia?
I am not. I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm a cheesehead.
Oh, okay. I see. I did not know that. So you and I have known each other like peripherally for a really long time because one of your
Yeah,
game show experiences I sort of have in common, and I sort of think of that first season of The Chase as like as a very sort of sacred group. That was an interesting
yeah.
group of people to be on a show for for its first season. It was exciting. Um, because we knew everybody each week. Like every week I knew at least one person on the show. So it was a fun sort of celebration.
That's such a great way to phrase it. I do feel like there was a strong sense of community on that particular show, much different than other game shows that I have been on.
Do you think that's because of who we are or because of how the show was? There are some shows that I think are very sort of cold backstage, and there are shows that feel like a family. And The Chase to me definitely felt like a more an experience more reminiscent of like a family dynamic.
Absolutely. And I think we have to give some credit to the casting folks and just the way that that show was put together. It was a lot of really good people, just good, solid people um, who meshed and gelled. And, part of that was we had to gel, those of us who were put together on teams for each episode of the show. But also, I just think a part of it is like they lucked out with a lot of really good eggs in the way that other shows don't, either because now I almost feel like being on a game show is like its own sort of industry, or there's a whole sort of industrial complex around being on a game show or being on a TV show. And also just now some of these shows have just batches and batches and batches of contestants, and it doesn't feel as intimate as The Chase felt to me.
Yeah, I realized this even now just talking about it. I had never been on a game show as part of a team. That was a dynamic that I was up until that point unfamiliar with. I had sort of played against the house or against other people on my own. But I wonder if that contributes to it as well, because I mean, my team's performance notwithstanding, I do think of that element of it. Like those are two people that I experienced that show with very intimately.
Yeah, one of the things that I have always loved about The Chase is that it is the contestants against the chaser, as opposed to the contestants against each other. And I found when I was on Mental Samurai, it was a similar dynamic. It was not each individual necessarily playing against the other contestants, at least at first, but against the chair, against Ava. And that for me is a very helpful, less stressful dynamic than beating up on the person at the podium next to you, which is how many shows are structured, right? You have one opponent or two opponents or however many opponents that you are going head to head with.
Yeah, I think in the right context that dynamic can come across on TV as mean. And I mean, game shows are based on competition. I mean, that's always been, a contestant against somebody or something. But yeah, I think that done the right way. And I think that's common to a lot of the quiz shows in the UK where there is definite competition, sometimes at a very high level, but at the end of the day, it does feel warm and friendly and cozy.
And what I love about a UK game show is it is often not for big bucks or any bucks or, pounds, as they would say. It is for a teapot or a beautiful crystal trophy or just the title of Brain of Britain or whatever it is. And even still, they take it so seriously in the UK. I really love that culture of everything from local pub quiz all the way up to tea time teaser and onto, prime time big money game show.
Tell me where that love of trivia and trivia type competition comes from. Where did game shows fit into your life growing up?
I think, like many people of my demo, I'm a geriatric millennial, and so I grew up with, The Price is Right on days home from school, and for me, Jeopardy aired at 3:30 on Channel 4, and that was something that I always enjoyed growing up. And I have always loved shows with a trivia or a knowledge component. I watched a lot of PBS as a kid. I'm an only child, so I spent a lot of time with the television, just sort of learning and observing and being exposed to new ideas and how the world worked. And I like challenges and puzzles and some of the competition element. And so whether it is those morning or daytime game shows that are maybe a little gentler and a little slower and a little more colorful, or the sort of cutthroat of Jeopardy or of a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where it's very serious and it's a lot of, slick surfaces and fast questions and beating a clock. I have always enjoyed watching that kind of a show. And as someone who, not to toot my own horn, but I'm a smarty. I'm a member of Mensa, and I like knowing things, and I like not just the knowing of the things, but quick recall. I think that one of my strengths as a quizzer is rapid fire quizzing. It doesn't fluster me. I love it. I just find it very exciting to be asked random questions all in a row for however long, until I pass out. That for me is the idea of that is a joy, which is wacky. I know it's not normal, but I do enjoy it. And so any sort of show, I mean, I'll watch any show with a quizzing element, even if it's a very casual one. But I love the shows where there's just a ton of bang for your buck question wise. And I always have, even since I was a kid and I didn't understand what any of the questions were. But when I got a Jeopardy question as a kid, boy, that was a pretty exciting afternoon.
Why do you and I love that format so much? You and I have that in common. I wish I could have somebody read me trivia questions for like an hour a day as quickly as they can, and I just knock them out. And if I don't, fine. But I just love, trivia, knowledge under pressure. That's my favorite game show mechanic, I think.
When I was on the chase, one of the things, and I think I talked about this on the show, this made it into the show, is that I love to take tests. I've always enjoyed, standardized test week at school or test day in a class. I liked that environment. And I know for many people, testing is a phobia. And even the sort of science and procedure of testing has probably evolved a lot since I was in school, because it is very troublesome for a lot of people. But for me, that whole idea of 60 minutes on the clock, flip your papers over, pick up your pencils, I just always found that really exhilarating. And I found that I was able to perform really well, even under all of those constraints. And that works well in some game show formats. That definitely comes in handy. Other game show formats, not so much. And certainly the game shows where they want you to take your time, talk us through your thinking, show us personality, right? Crack wise and be saucy to your opponents or to the game show mechanical chair. That's maybe where I'm not quite so entertaining, quite such good TV. But if you need rapid fire stuff, I'm your gal.
I wonder if this is common to your experience, but I also enjoy the pressure of standardized testing under time limits. I remember in math class in elementary school, we used to have like our drills. There'd be 25 simple multiplication problems, kind of arranged 5 by 5. You do them as quickly as you can. I remember being able to do them so quickly and other tests of that similar sort of variety that my teacher would always warn me to hey, did you do it all? Did you double check your work? Were you frequently asked to double check your work growing up in school because of that speed at which you like to take tests?
Yeah, totally. Or the idea of you can't be done already. Did you do both sides of the paper, Heather? It's a two-sided test. That kind of stuff definitely, came up quite a bit. No. I did them all. Yes, I'm done. Yes, I've double checked. No, I'm, go ahead and grade me now. I think I got it.
Right. You grew up in Wisconsin, and I know that in a lot of other areas of the country, I grew up in the Northeast, and we didn't have Quiz Bowl or anything like that where I would have an outlet for this skill. I know that in a lot of other areas of the country, there are local game shows and there are Quiz Bowl competitions, and some of them are televised and some of them are not, and some of them are school sanctioned. Did you have any outlet for this skill when you were in school?
I think the closest that we had was I grew up going religious and going to religious schools. And so in the religious community, there's the concept of Bible quizzing, which is basically Quiz Bowl, just focused on Bible facts, Bible information. And I never did any of it. I never actually participated in it, but I was very aware of the Bible quizzing teams And, I went to schools with very strong Bible quizzing programs. And there were, local competitions that led to state competitions and national competitions. And it was speed quizzing, but in my time/in our state, instead of buzzers, you had to stand up to answer. I think they had sensors on the chairs that indicated who stood up first. And that sort of format for me just like didn't the idea of like lurching out of my seat every time I wanted to answer just did not appeal. And also it was very clicky and very much a popularity contest. And while I was known as the smart girl, I was certainly not like the popular girl or anything like that. And so I was a little turned off to that whole organized quizzing, capital O, capital Q program. And so for me, I think the closest thing to sort of regional localized trivia and quizzing that I can think of, and this is, I don't know if this even counts, but the Wisconsin Lottery had a little show for a while called the Wisconsin Lottery Money Game. And it was a little like Wheel of Fortune in that there was a board with letters that a hostess turned. And I don't remember all of the mechanics, but you would, I think, spin a wheel or something, or you would maybe just call out letters in the phrase Wisconsin Lottery Money Game. And the glamorous hostess would turn whichever letter you got or wanted. And there would be a dollar amount behind that letter. And then it was three contestants, very similar again to Wheel of Fortune. And somehow at the end, through a procedure that I have forgotten, one person walked away with, I mean, not thousands and thousands of dollars, but maybe a couple $1,000s on a good day. And so that was, I remember, I don't even remember, I think you had to enter by mailing in voided lottery tickets or something. And of course, as a child, I wasn't even eligible to enter. But I remember thinking in the smallest, earliest versions of my dreams of being on a game show, maybe someday I could get on the Wisconsin Lottery Money Game and win like $1,000. Wouldn't that just be the greatest achievement that I could ever dream of?
Oh, wonderful. Those shows are great. There are so many local lottery shows that, especially I think in like the 80s, 90s, 2000s. And my wife and I watch what episodes of it pop up on YouTube. There was a show in late 80s, early 90s in California called The Big Spin. And like you described, Heather, you enter the show by mailing in a scratch-off lottery ticket. If you scratch off 3 wheels, you put it in the mail and they put you in a barrel and they pick you. They fly you to Sacramento and you just spin a wheel and the wheel just has money all over it. I think it starts at 50,000, but then there's like a progressive sort of jackpot and you just win whatever you spin. And there's something, there's a subreddit called The Way We Were on Video. And it's a lot of footage of candid footage of just people going about their daily lives in the 80s and 90s. Sometimes you see videos of, the last day of a certain graduating class of high school and, they kind of interview everybody and see what everybody was wearing. It's a time capsule in that way. It's wonderful to just see everyday people win money and there's no other thought required. There's no other complication. It's just really fun and positive TV, which I think is part of the allure of game shows, period. But it's just in such a pure form, I think, in some of those lottery shows.
And looking back at it now as an adult and as someone who is really interested in the process of producing a game show and the sort of casting and putting together the gameplay, and I just would love to have known more about, how many entries were they getting and how did they decide who was on the show? How did they get them there? How did we come up with the format for it and cast the host and all of that? It's all those things as a kid, you're just sort of absorbing what is presented to you and enjoying it and having a great time. But now as an adult and having seen behind the scenes on some of this, how these things are made, I'm so curious to know, in the state of Wisconsin, at the Wisconsin Lottery, how did that thing ever come to fruition and how did it go? And I don't think they have it anymore. So, why did it go off the air? What happened? I need like a behind the music on the Wisconsin Lottery Money Game.
Why do you love Wheel of Fortune so much? As a show that's not very trivia based at all. It's not knowledge under pressure the way that you love. What about Wheel of Fortune made that show that you had dreamed of being on?
I think it's a couple of things. I think one, I am very much a visual learner. I like a big visual. And so the idea of the turning letters back in the day, or now the sort of big letter screens, just always very much sticks in my brain. And again, it's sort of the thing obviously that drills into my subconscious, and I always in the dreams that big board is very prominent. I also love sort of that the sound, that foley of the wheel, the click 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 clicking of the wheel. And I've always wondered, how hard is it to spin? I'm a lefty, how does that work? Like all the logistics of the wheel. I love a big set piece, and I think that set is full of really interesting set pieces. I also love words. I've always, been a bit of a word nerd. I don't do Wordle. I do Octordle, people. I do the one with 8, and I pay for Octordle Gold because I love words and vocabulary. Again, big reader, and so I've always loved language. And even though Wheel of Fortune is a very simplistic version of language, it is a language-based show, and it is it is one, especially if they've gotten clever with categories of, before and after sorts of things. And honestly, we all know there's sometimes just the randomest phrases are puzzles on Wheel of Fortune, but I sort of like that evolution of the game and the evolution of language, that Wheel of Fortune is, granted a very sort of light, casual version of. But to me, it just always, Vanna's in a glamorous dress, and the set is covered in glitter, and the cards that that Pat picks up out of the little wheel in the bonus round are all sparkly and everything. To me, that was just very glitzy and glamorous, and glamorous, and it still just really sort of sticks out in my mind as, like, if I had to sort of show an alien, like, what is a game show? Like, I might point them to Wheel first, because there's so much to look at, and there's so much going on, that something about that just really appeals to me. And again, I'm going to have to amp up my personality way, way much in order to even be considered for it. But someday, at which point I might just sort of retire, hang up the game show spurs, and say, I have made it. I have finally been on Wheel.
Good luck. I know you can do it. Yeah, I just, it's funny. Last season, I talked to a kid named Christy Cooper who was on Countdown. And he was a 3-day champ, so he brought home the teapot. And we talked about word games, and we talked about the differences between shows here and shows in the UK. And he mentioned really liking word games like Wheel of Fortune. And I realized that in the context of the glitz and glamour of our version of Wheel of Fortune, it's often lost that it's a word game, that and that there is a decent amount of challenge to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just spelling, the mechanics of spelling and things, but it's the idea of, there's a category in Wheel of Fortune called What Are You Doing? And that often contains a gerund, which is a type of word that ends in ing, right? Running to the store. Well, ing. So, okay, of course, one of your first letters that you call should be an N or a G. But people don't do that, especially when I watch, oh my goodness, Celebrity Wheel of Fortune, which I, of course, adore, but also is so frustrating to me, because while they know, oh, okay, a one-letter word is going to be I or A, and they'll, they'll spot the thes and things like that, they won't realize some of those more sophisticated language things that I think regular civilian Wheel of Fortune contestants are all over. And in the pop-up rounds and some of the things, I can't even keep up with some of the regular contestants on the show. And I'm always impressed when people beat me at Wheel of Fortune or at a trivia thing. I'm super impressed, because I'm no slouch. And so I love to see people who are so sharp at Wheel of Fortune questions or Jeopardy questions or whatever. But yeah, the language part of Wheel of Fortune, I enjoy. Sometimes it's complicated and sometimes it's very, very simple, but I still find it very satisfying.
At what point, I think you might have alluded to it, but I'll ask it this way. Was your initial game show experience the catalyst for a fascination with the behind-the-scenes process, or was that something that you had grown interested in before you tried out to be on the chase?
I would say that it was being on a game show that made me realize how much the 30 or 60 minutes you see on your TV is really the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
There is so much weeks and months and maybe even years before that of assembling that tidy 30 to 60 minutes that you see on your TV. And that is not something as a Wisconsin girl with no connections to Hollywood or even really any sort of artist who is producing entertainment work. I just had never sort of thought about that before. But when you go through a casting process and then a production process and then the agonizing wait until your show airs, you realize, oh, this is a whole saga of activities that make this episode of television, come into being.
It's amazing how much, like you said, time and energy and effort it takes. And it's also sort of softened my stance, I think, on new game shows. I'm very critical, I think, of any game show that's come out in the past like 15 years or so, with very rare exception. I'm very much an old school game show fan, but being part of that process, not just once, but more than once, has definitely it's softened my approach to critiquing game shows, because at the end of the day, each show is representative of a huge sort of family of people that all work together for this common goal. It's hard to not respect that element of the production.
And I am almost on the other side of that coin in that I have a bit of an affection, I would say, for these new game shows. We're in an age where there's like a wacky game show concept coming out every other week, it seems. And I avidly see those casting notices, and I've had great luck on shows that are new and wacky because they are new and wacky. And I think I always advise people, if you can get on the first season of a game show, I think that's the way to go, because you're on a solid footing with everybody else and figuring out how does this thing work and what is the best strategy. And so when I see something coming out, I mean, when we're recording this, there's a show airing on Fox called The Floor, hosted by my friend Rob Lowe from Mental Samurai,
Right.
and probably produced by some of the same people because it has a lot of the same hallmarks, I think, as Mental Samurai. And it is a very casual trivia element, but I have been enjoying it. And I have been thinking, that is 81 contestants in the case of that show who have been giddily waiting to get their 15 minutes or 15 seconds, in the case of some of them, of fame. And one of them eventually, in theory, is going to win a lot of money, assuming that show airs, which is another thing that people are often surprised about is, you don't get the money in theory. You aren't guaranteed that money until the show airs. And so every time I watch a show that seems to be quote unquote burning off episodes long after they filmed, I think to myself, well, the people who are on that show and who won money are really relieved this thing is finally airing, because they have been holding their breath, hoping that it does air so that they can get that money. It's all these little considerations that the casual viewer has no idea about.
For sure. It's almost like the human element of it, because you watch a game show and yeah, the contestants are people and you relate to them to a certain degree. But once the show is over, your involvement with them is over, which is why, game shows are so bingeable and so, in comparison to other types of TV, sort of ephemeral. When you become part of that game show process, yeah, you do get a certain, you gain a certain appreciation for what goes into it. It's an experience. It's hard to describe. Before I started talking to all these contestants, the best word I would have for my experience was surreal. It's surreal to be in front of TV cameras on the set of a show that you've seen, on TV for years and years. It's surreal to be in a giant mechanical chair answering questions from Rob Lowe. It's hard to describe. It was harder to describe for me, before I realized it's a much more common experience, that surreal quality.
And even within the game show contestant experience, there are lots of ways for that to go. You have a show like Jeopardy where that thing is a machine. I mean, it kind of, a lot of it runs itself. And it, for me, was my worst game show experience because it didn't end well, but money wise, but also it just felt very, a little cold and impersonal. And that doesn't mean I'm asking for my hand to be held throughout the whole thing, but you very much felt like the product in a way that on other shows, maybe I felt a little more like an individual, or at least the talent. And I use very big air quotes there. But, as a game show contestant, obviously you are the content, you are the product, you are the entertainment. But with Jeopardy, because they're running so many shows a day, three people at a time, and they've been doing this for decades.
Get them in, get them out.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just cattle through the chute a little bit is kind of how it felt to me.
That's a great point. And I think it's something that I'm sure you felt worked to your advantage on the chase. It worked to my advantage, I think, to a certain degree as well. I definitely felt a sense of comfort that I don't think I would have felt on a show like Jeopardy. And going back to what you said about, it almost behooves a person to get on the first season of a show because you're on that same footing with everybody around you. Like, this is a new experience to everybody and not just you. Very valuable, I think.
Yeah, I mean, with Jeopardy, another thing is there are, websites and books, actual books about how to wager and how to buzz, and you can get practice signaling devices and all of that. And people now are, really professional about becoming Jeopardy contestants and being on Jeopardy. And none of that is wrong. The statistics and the sportsification of it, I'm sure people are all over. But to me, that just means the competition is so much harder to get on. And then once you're on, do well on the show. Whereas on a completely new show or a show that people aren't as familiar with, I feel like as someone who can hopefully grasp the concept quickly, grasp the gameplay quickly, and just kind of perform well, maybe faster than everybody else, that already gives me a leg up.
Would you ever work as a contesting coordinator?
What an interesting question. I don't know that I would. I mean, I'm very much an introvert. I am very much not a people person, although I like to think I can flip it on when I, am on a show. Although certainly, speaking of our mutual friend Corey, so he and I were talking recently, and I was mentioning that I have long had a wish to be on Wheel of Fortune. That's a show that I've literally had many, many dreams about being on, more than any other show. But the way that Wheel of Fortune's qualifications work, I think you cannot have been on 3 game shows in the past 10 years. And so I keep sort of ruining my blackout window for Wheel of Fortune, which is fine. I always tell people, take the money now, the game show now, rather than the game show in the future. But when I was telling Corey all of this about, I want to be on Wheel, he said to me something like, you're going to have to turn it up, girl, because he's absolutely right that the people on Wheel of Fortune are incredibly exuberant and colorful and all of those things. And I just, in my normal life, am very much the button down, mousy librarian type who would rather be reading a book than talking to a person or looking into a camera. And so I feel like the contestant coordinators that I've been lucky enough to deal with and the producers are all really always exuberant and excited, and they make you feel like they want you to do well, and that they do that for hundreds of people a show or a year. And I would find that probably exhausting after very quickly, and then just start getting cranky with people instead of supportive. And so I admire greatly all of the casting agents and the production assistants and those people who've got to deal with, I mean, it's got to be like herding cats, people who are new to TV and new to being on TV and new to playing a game show and all these things. And I don't have kids for a reason. I don't like managing people. And I think I enjoy watching them and cheering them on, but finding them and shepherding them through the process would probably not go well for me or them.
I think I agree with you 100%. I was offered the opportunity once. There's a casting agent who put me on a couple of shows, and it's to the point where I could send her a message if a new show comes out and ask her if I'm eligible or not. It's kind of nice to have that quick way of finding out whether it's worth my time or not. But there was an opening at her casting agency, and I was between jobs, and she knew that, and she had offered me this opportunity to cast for a show. I forget what show it was. I don't think she told me what show it was. You probably can't know until you get the job. And I thought about it, and I turned it down. One, because if you take a job like that, just according to her, you can essentially never be a contestant on a game show again, which didn't feel worth it to me at that point in time. And then, yeah, I would never want to start. Sometimes I wonder how badly I want to work behind the scenes on game shows. It seems like anybody who likes game shows would just love to do that. I don't know that I really want to do that. I don't know that I want to take the risk of transforming a hobby that I love enjoying passively into something that I hate interacting with. I don't know that I would want to take that risk.
Yeah, it feels almost like if you turned it into work, then it would feel like, work. And being on a game show or watching a game show would remind you of work. And I think for me, the happy medium here is being an audience member. So Jeopardy used to do power players, and one year they came to Washington, D.C. to film with politicians and reporters and stuff like that. And they filmed at DAR Constitution Hall, which is a big historical venue here. And I was able to go. I think they filmed for 3 days, and I was able to get tickets for all 3 days and take a big group of people. And it was delightful to see how do they position the cameras and what does that scoreboard look like in real life and how long does it take to film the episode versus what you see on TV and what do they do during the commercial? All of those things that delight me so much about the production process. As an audience member, you can see, but you're not responsible for any of them, or you're not having to make sure that things happen, which is, again, I would find sort of stressful. And then not wanting to actually watch the show after that I had, cast and produced and all of that, I would just probably by the end of it be like, oh, I'm so glad that's done. I don't want to think about it anymore. I'm on to the next project, which also happens a lot with these people that you meet on game shows. I sometimes see people saying like, oh, I haven't gotten my check yet, and I emailed the casting agent and she didn't know anything. But well, no, because that casting agent was hired months ago to work in a limited capacity on your show to cast you, and now they're on to the next thing. It's not like most of these game shows aren't just a squad of people that stay together working on that game show forever. Jeopardy's probably an exception, but a lot of these people are just contractors doing a gig at a time.
I am amazed at how many people have trouble accepting that. Becoming a contestant, you are the star or one of the stars for a day. And I guess in retrospect, I shouldn't be surprised. Applause and affirmation of yourself as a person, those things can be very addictive. But I'm amazed at how many people, don't grasp that you are in the spotlight for now. But yes, tomorrow it will be a different set of people. It's not you anymore.
Yeah, and another piece of advice that I give to aspiring contestants is when you're in the green room with all of the other contestants waiting to go on, you need to do you. There are going to be people there who are extroverted and friendly, and they want to introduce everybody. And hey, let's all play a big group get a big group game of charades or cards or whatever.
I hate
and
that.
there's always that guy. And look, early on, I felt a little more pressure to do that. But when I was on Jeopardy, I was that I wasn't the extroverted leader, but I was, very friendly to everybody. I was bantering with the production assistants, and I was cheering up the other contestants who were nervous and blah, blah, blah. And I ended up using all of my energy on that and not on the performance. And so now when I am on shows and in green rooms, I take a book or a magazine. They take your phone. So I take some kind of paper thing to read, and I just bury my nose in it. And I'm sure I come off as standoffish and rude to the other contestants, but I know that I need to save my energy for the actual show and that I need to look out for myself first. And these people I am not going to see again probably after this day of filming. And so I don't feel bad if maybe I offend them a little or I come across as cold to them, because even though everyone says, oh, we're going to be best friends for the rest of our lives after being on this show together, the odds are you probably won't. I mean, other than the chase people, as you alluded to, we all, I think, stayed fairly close. But other shows that I've been on, someone will start a Facebook group for people who are on the show. There will be a few posts as the show airs and as we congratulate everyone on their performances. And then the thing goes silent because, yes, it's a bonding experience in the moment and for a little while afterwards, but it's not the kind of bonding experience that transcends the years and the miles and the distance that as the time elapses after your show airs. And that's just the reality of it.
I have been nodding so hard to everything you're saying. I could hear it in my microphone. You and I have this same strategy. I don't like making conversation before the show. I kind of just want to be in my own space and yeah, conserving my energy. When I got to the chase, I think I was the second tape day. And this is kind of going back to what you were talking about, the advice to sort of do you, be you, do your thing. We each, I don't know if this is the same situation with your tape day, Heather, but we were two to a dressing room. So there were a bunch of dressing rooms and I was in one room with somebody else and so on and so forth. And there was a little bathroom area, so the watch TV room. I got introduced to the person that I was going to be in my dressing room with. They opened the door and she was hanging from the coat rack in the closet by her ankles.
Oh.
And she heard the door open and she kind of arched forward so I could see her face. She said, "Hello, I'm just doing some yoga. Don't mind me." And she spent the rest of the time in our dressing room, just kind of bending all over the room and kind of crab walking. And it was your advice to the millionth degree, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also true even before you get on the show when you're casting, when you're going to auditions, and there are always those people who are kind of trying to intimidate everyone by saying what their other academic accomplishments are, or the other shows they've been on, or, who do you know kind of a thing. And I'm certainly at the point in my game show career now where I have plenty of impressive credentials on my own, I think, but I'm just not the type of person who's going to do that. I would rather just sit quietly in a corner and wait for the audition to begin, wait to be called into the room or whatever. But I think it is important to recognize that for some people, you doing you is they want to introduce themselves to everybody and they want to, try to nag everybody into being nervous about the audition or about the game or whatever, or they want to set up a big, poker game in the green room. That's cool. But for some of us, it's just, can we just sit quietly, please, and just wait for the thing to go on?
Have you had the experience of being negged at an audition? I imagine being in a room with other potential mental samurai contestants that might have been at play.
I'm trying to think. I think Mental Samurai was mostly Skype auditions. So I was fortunate in that way that it was really just me and the various levels of casting and then later on production. I remember, I think most clearly for The Chase, because that was my first game show, I kind of just did it on a lark because I loved the original British version so much. And I thought, well, won't this make a fun story that time that the Chase came to Washington, D.C., and I tried out for it. And that'll be the end of that. And I remember walking into that because it was held at a hotel. And we were all a little uncertain because, there was no how-to guide on the internet about auditioning for The Chase. We were all sort of unsure, is this the right room? What do you think we'll be doing and all of that? And there were a group of people there who were, I guess, maybe all sort of known to each other from the DC pub trivia community and Learned League, which I was not in at that time. And they all just kind of knew each other. And I'll be honest, they were all guys, that's fine. But they all had sort of that a little bit of a fraternal air about them, and referencing people, well-known quizzers by first name and commenting on different sort of quizzy things that I really didn't understand. And I'm just walking in here, no idea what any of this is, just gal with a cardigan and Kindle in hand and just trying to be polite, but not having any idea what I was about to get myself into. And you certainly find that very intimidating initially. And then it's funny, when I was on Mental Samurai and got into the green room and was talking with the other contestants and was just not trying to nag them at all, but just sort of mentioning, because I think someone said, who else has been on a game show here? And there were a few people who had been on other game shows. And then I mentioned sort of a string of game shows that I'd been on. And you saw people's eyes bug out a little bit and me thinking, oh no, now I've turned into that guy that I didn't want to be. But yeah, I think probably the most, although the Jeopardy audition, and I think I did 2 or 3 before I actually got on the show, though the Jeopardy audition was probably the most people and the most process, the most layers, the most, tests and all of that and rounds of auditioning. that one to me just felt, again, it felt a little like I didn't take the SAT, I took the ACT. It felt a little like taking the ACT, auditioning for Jeopardy, just kind of clinical and mathematical. And that's fine. I have no problem with the clinical mathematical part of the game show process. But I think the Chase audition, ironically, was the one where I just felt sort of the most like scared and intimidated, not only because it was new, but because it was in an era when, we didn't have Zoom and Skype and all of that. It was in person. And it was, in the case of the Chase, just show up to a random hotel conference room and hope I'm not about to lose a kidney or be shunted in a van to a foreign country to, as a mail order bride. It worked out. Luckily, it worked out. But
Good
you just
for you.
never know. It's the dangerous side of the first year of a new game show. Is this a game show or is this a really elaborate scam? Stay tuned.
That's exactly it. You described a minute ago feeling sort of out of the loop at that first audition for the Chase, and you were sort of uninitiated into that world of quizzing, and there was all kinds of jargon and things being said around you that you didn't necessarily feel clued in on. How did that aspect of your life change for you after your game show appearances? Did you suddenly feel yourself sort of becoming ushered into this sort of world of competitive quizzing?
I think you do a little bit. I mean, I think that some people enter it young through the quiz bowl and the very formalized quizzing competitions that we have and that are wonderful. I mean, I wish I had had that opportunity to quiz, and I enjoy now that I'm in the quizzing world a little bit more to, I moderate at quiz bowl competitions that are held here in DC and things like that. And I love it primarily, I'll be honest, as a way of just keeping my own trivia skills sharp. I think it is very helpful to be a moderator and read those questions and read those answers to the kids. But when you're on a game show, and I like a game show with a trivia element, absolutely. And for me, I don't think about, I had a cash builder and I think I got 11 questions right in my cash builder on the Chase, but I only fixate on the ones that I got wrong. And that part of that is being raised by a wonderful Korean tiger mom whose first comment to me after watching me on the Chase was, well, you did get some wrong. Oh, I know, Mom. No, I know. And so, for me, I always look for the ways to address the knowledge gaps. And so I think definitely, while I've always been a big reader and lover of knowledge, as someone who now has been on game shows and would like to be on more game shows, thank you very much, anyone who's listening, I absolutely look for ways to improve my knowledge base. And sometimes that is a formalized quizzing situation. Sometimes that is, for me, sports was a big gap. So I watch a lot more ESPN than I used to, just to be familiar with what's happening in the sports world and who the names are of the players that I need to know. And I, that for me as a little, lover of knowledge and a little nerdy nerd, all of that dovetails in very nicely with my lifestyle of just, I always want to know more things, and there are always more things out there to know.
That's great. That's a great outlook. And I feel like that's the mindset of a good competitive quizzer, right? It's the work is never done. I don't imagine you feel like at any point you'll be good to go in terms of knowledge and in terms of sharpening those skills.
Well, exactly right. And I do feel like as I sort of enter my old and crotchety portion of a phase of my life, there's all this sort of young people trivia. Listen to me sounding like an old jaded person. All this young people trivia and, TikTok phenoms and popular YouTube gamers and all of this. And I know sometimes in the highfalutin trivia circles, there is this idea of sort of the canon of trivia, which, is proper trivia. And then there is pop culture and the lowbrow trivia that is somehow less worth knowing. And I think, any good fact is a good fact. And it doesn't matter if that fact has to do with, Thomas Paine and common sense, or if that has to do with Mr. Beast and some kind of, collaboration he's doing with McDonald's or whatever. I think if someone cares about it, it's worth knowing about. And that the more you go on and sort of get removed from being the target demographic of 18 to 25-year-olds or whatever in this country, you realize, oh man, I'm gonna have to keep up with what shows are the kids watching, what's the latest Pixar movie, what what are the kids into? What are the young people into these days? But for me, you got to know it because it could come up in a quiz situation, on a game show or in Learning League or something like that. And so it's daunting. I certainly get old and crotchety about it sometimes, but there's just an ever expanding, to me, the canon is ever expanding, and it has to. Like, it just, we have to include facts about things that aren't just, a British centric or whatever the classical knowledge what was considered to be.
Right. Yeah, there is a sort of base material set around trivia that I love hip hop music. I think I know everything about hip hop. Will I ever see a hip hop category on Jeopardy? Probably not. Maybe once in a while. But yeah, and I think that that's part of what makes the quest for trivia sort of fascinating, that there's always another world of knowledge that you can study. There's always something to know and something to learn, like you said.
Yeah, which I mean is not to denigrate, the classics, the periodic table and the list of presidents and things like that. But it's like the more you're just moving throughout the world and reading international news or going to restaurants of different cultures, you realize, oh, there's these whole other worlds out there of things to know about and, holidays and foods and all of these things that, yeah, like you said, there might never be a Jeopardy question about these things, but it's still such a wonderful thing to be exposed to. I mean, that's why I love to travel so much, is because it makes you realize how much is out there when you go to another country and you realize they do everything differently here. The seasons are flipped in this country. What is happening? There's just so much to the human experience. And in my opinion, why wouldn't you want to expose yourself there, by learning about it or by going there or whatever?
Sure. Well, I almost think about it as similar to working in the tech industry, right? I mean, you can come up in the 80s and the 90s, the sort of age of the personal computer, and you can stay stuck in that knowledge base, but that world is moving past you. There are evolutions and there are breakthroughs and there are things in the future of that industry that you might do well to know if you want to continue being a viable candidate in that industry. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and viable candidate is such a good way. That's such a wonderful turn of phrase to think about it. Because yeah, I mean, when you're applying to these game shows, I tell people, you've got to pick sort of your angle. And, if the casting agent had to look at your file and summarize it in a quick phrase, what would it be? I often say for me, like, I'm the librarian candidate or the book candidate because I love to read and I used to work at the Library of Congress and blah, 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 blah. And, for other people, it might be, the woman who loves dogs or the man who loves to garden or whatever the situation is. But part of being a viable candidate, in addition to sort of what do you bring to the game show personality wise, is this person going to do good at the game? Do they know things, or are they funny? And I mean, you, Christian, are a wonderful example of someone who both knows things and is funny. And that's why your match game was such a wonderful performance to see, because that's a game that I don't think I would get cast on, because it is a lot about being punny with a P and also funny in the moment, with bantering with celebrities, right? And being a good bringing good show part to the part of the game show. And that's a show where colorful people, and I mean that in the kindest way, do really, really well, and staid people like me maybe not so much. And so, I look at I'm not a viable candidate for a show like Match Game, but I love to watch it. I loved watching that and some of these more personality driven shows, because that is entertaining too. And that show part of game show is very entertaining. Some game shows are more game, right? It is more about whatever the game is, the trivia element or the game element. And I like those too. And those are the ones that I go out for, because I think I'm a more viable candidate for the I guess sort of less the ones where I don't have to be such a colorful personality on television. I know you, but I think we're both, interesting candidates for different types of shows. And it's just a good reminder that not everyone is a good match for every show. You got to kind of pick a lane sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. And that, that's a piece of advice that has come up with interesting frequency in the last few episodes of this that I've recorded, that idea that know your strength as a potential contestant and go for shows that cater to your strength. Don't set yourself up for disappointment by going to audition for a game that you have no interest in. Give yourself the best opportunity to succeed. Do the thing that you're good at. I turned down an audition for Deal or No Deal. I just could not get into it. And it's easy money. You walk into the studio, pick a box, and then you're back in the parking lot. But I just I couldn't get excited for it. And as much as they want, and they were asking me to audition, and I could not, I couldn't do it. And I took it as a sign of maturity. I think that 10 years ago, I would have jumped at any opportunity to do anything on TV because I just love it so much. But I think that I've mellowed out a little bit. And so I took that as a sign that okay, I'm growing up a little bit. You know what I mean? That idea that I can turn down an opportunity because it's not the best for me, was a bit of a paradigm shift for me personally.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, when they were casting for the floor, and this was before Rob Lowe had been announced as host, and I don't know, it took a little bit of digging to even realize that it was going to be the floor. It was sort of just casting for unnamed game show. And of course, I'm always interested in unnamed game show because that means season 1 of what appears to be a trivia show hit me up. But then as I was digging through the casting, I think they were saying they were going to film in Amsterdam. And look, for many people, they say right there, sign me up, right? Potential free trip to Amsterdam, I'll take it. But then when you read through a little bit of the mechanics of how the game was going to work and how the filming was going to work, for me, it was at a time where it would not have been convenient to travel to Amsterdam. And the show kind of promised, one person is going to win big money. And then I thought to myself, well, that's not very good odds if there's only one winner of that big jackpot. And then for all of the people who get kicked out right away, what happens? I mean, are you in Amsterdam you got to fly to Amsterdam, you're there for a couple of hours and then you got to fly back. For me, all of those logistics are things that I consider now. And sometimes you turn it down. Whereas, as you said, 10 years ago, I might have said, oh, Amsterdam, someone's going to pay me to fly to Amsterdam. I'll do it. I would love to go to Amsterdam. But there are a lot of sort of logistical considerations that you start to think more about as you do this. And maybe it's a show concept you're not so on board with. Maybe it's a travel situation you're not interested in. All of these factors you think about more and more, when you are a repeat contestant, I think.
Sure, absolutely. And Mental Samurai, I mean, talk about a wacky experience, a potential wacky experience. I would love to know how that opportunity materialized for you. And I would love to hear about your experience on the set of that show and winning and becoming the champion. I would love to know all about that.
Yeah, so you had mentioned that you have a casting agent that or that knows you or both. And as it's absolutely true that as you go through more casting processes, you will come into contact with people who like you or who sort of keep a sticky note on your file. And that is a little bit what happened to me with Mental Samurai, because I had auditioned for a show that never aired called America's Brightest, I think it was. And I believe I originally encountered that casting notice because it was spread among the MENSA membership, because for America's Brightest, they were looking for, the title says, as it says on the tin, America's Brightest, like geniuses and things to compete in some kind of show. And, I filled out the application. I think I even had a few Skype interviews for that, but it just fizzled out, as these things are wont to do. I mean, that's part of the gamble with game shows, and especially with new game shows. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. It just never goes anywhere. But one good thing that came out of the America's Brightest process was that this person liked me, or thought that I could be a good contestant for this new game show they were assigned to work on, which turned out to be Mental Samurai. And so I had a bit of a sort of referral or a leg up on the process, but still for Mental Samurai was absolutely filling out an application and having a whole series. I think I did 4 interviews with different levels of people in order to get cast on Mental Samurai. And I I don't know that from the beginning, I certainly didn't know anything about how the game worked or the fact that Rob Lowe would be hosting it or any of those sorts of specifics. But it was always framed as a sort of trivia centric game, and I'm into trivia centric. But then the um, physical element of the whirling chair definitely made me nervous. I'm not a roller coaster person. I'm not a thrill seeker. And then as part of the audition process, when they ask you to get a doctor's examination and they had some paperwork they needed a doctor to sign off on, that started to make me really think twice about whether I wanted to do this at all. Because I'm thinking, am I going to go on national television and get like throw up or get sick or be so dizzy that I can't even play the game? And while that would make for wonderful TV and everyone would be entertained and I'd get memed and all of that, that wasn't what I was looking for at all, of course. And so I had to sort of get the whole doctor's exam and send in all this paperwork and then just sort of cross my fingers that it would all work out and not be super intense. And luckily it was really not bad at all. And in the moment, when you're, at least for me, when I was answering the questions on Mental Samurai, I was so focused on the trivia that the chair, I wasn't even realizing that any of that was really happening, because all I was thinking about is what is the next question and making sure that I was playing the game as well as I could. And like I didn't even realize that the chair was going most of the time. So it was fun to watch that one in particular to see how it all looked on TV, because obviously it's a very different perspective from when you were playing in the chair.
Let me
But
pause you for
itself,
just a second, Heather, if you don't
yeah.
mind. Just for anybody at home who might have not seen Mental Samurai, what is the significance of the chair? How does that play into the game? And just a quick overview of how that game is played.
Yeah, excellent point. Because it was not a very high rated show, so there are probably a lot of people who have no idea what I'm talking about. Mental Samurai aired on Fox in 2019, was the season that I was on, hosted by Rob Lowe, and it was an individual trivia competition where a contestant would be strapped in a mechanical chair that would it was called Ava, was the name that they gave it, and they had like a woman do a voiceover speaking as Ava, and you put time on the clock, and the chair would start sort of spinning you around and then point you at one of, I think, four big video screens. And you would be asked a certain type of question at each video screen. And I like one of the categories was memory, like where they would show you a picture and then take it away, and you'd have to answer a question about what was in the picture. I think there was like some pattern recognition. There was a little bit of light trivia, but it was, of all the game shows I've been on, or all of the trivia shows that I've watched, it was the most that was similar to the kind of questions you get asked on the Mensa exam, like true intelligence questions, where it doesn't have anything to do with memorizing the names of the presidents in order. It is absolutely, if shown a pattern of four colors, can you tell what the fifth color would be, sort of a thing. And so Mental Samurai in the initial rounds had each player seeing if they could, I think, answer 12 questions in a certain amount of time. And those of us who were able to answer the 12 questions won an amount of money and then went on to compete against each other to see if we could answer more questions. And then the person who did the best in that Circle of Samurai round, I think they called it, though that one winner won the big jackpot of $250,000. And I was the big winner in the first season of the show. I think there were 11 of us that made it that far out of probably several hundred people. I mean, they just went through a ton of people on that show, not all of whom even I think made it to air, but I don't know how they did the actuarial statistics in predicting how they would get enough candidates, and not too many and not too few, to air that one final Circle of Samurai. It wasn't the Circle of Samurai. Anyway, the one sort of championship episode. And I'm now realizing the phrase Circle of Samurai is after I answered my initial 12 questions. I believe I went on to an intermediate round called the Circle of Samurai, where I was asked up to 4 additional questions, perhaps each for additional money. And so that performance in that Circle of Samurai round was part of how they determined us. They rank ordered us, the final 11 of us, for that final grand championship episode. But anyway, suffice to say, it was multiple rounds of trivia, but I use that term very lightly because it was really sort of intelligence IQ testing sorts of questions. And then you got the physical element of being sort of disrupted in space, being moved up and down, hither and yon by this chair. And then by the end of it in that championship round, you're competing against other people because you had to sort of answer ideally the most questions the fastest. And it was a really interesting group of people. You asked about sort of the process of being on the show, and with that one, because there were so many of us, we filmed in batches over several days. And the day that I was there, I feel like that green room had dozens and dozens of people, and it was the largest square footage wise green room that I've ever been in. It was a huge room, and they didn't have a mock-up of the chair because of course we were all curious, what is this chair going to look like? And I should not have, but I had Googled sort of mechanical chairs. And of course I'm seeing things put together by like the MIT robotics lab that is flinging a person around at like 60 miles an hour. And I was thinking, oh
great.
no.
Yeah, one of those
toast.
super chairs from Brazil.
Exactly. So it didn't turn out to be that, although in the green room, all they had was an office chair on like wheels. And then I think they were like, if people wanted to try to spin themselves around in that, but clearly you want to try to replicate the real thing. And we didn't actually see that until we walked out on the stage. And it was quite large and intimidating, but we didn't actually see it in motion until we played, which, for better or worse. So yeah, in that green room, what I liked about my Mental Samurai experience, which is my best game show experience, not just because I won the most money, but because I went into it really with expecting nothing, which is, I think, absolutely the way to go. With Jeopardy, I had such high expectations and then I lost and was literally weeping when I left the studio. And that's no fun for anybody. But with Mental Samurai, I went into it with no expectations. I was in the first group called of the day. So I didn't have time to sit and get nervous reading my little magazine cover to cover. But when I was called as part of the first group to film on film day, I went second. So I got the chance to see one person play the game before me. And with this being a new show and having that physical chair element, it was so incredibly helpful to watch one person play and then be able to play my round. And what was interesting about watching that one person play is this person who went in front of me, I don't remember his name, but he was an Olympian, literally had, I think, 2 gold medals. He had brought the Olympic medals because that was, of course, a wonderful, cool demo and thing to show on the show and to talk to Rob Lowe about. But I'm thinking to myself, holy cow, I am here with a literal Olympian. I think it was a diver or something. He's got gold medals. And then I watched him play the game and he was terrible. And I thought, oh, well, that's kind of reassuring because as you watch these game shows, especially ones with a real quick time element, a lot of people, when you put them under a time pressure, they collapse. They just they can't remember their own name when the clock is going. And as you and I have already discussed, like, I love a time pressure. Put me under the clock and give me some kind of time restriction and I'm good to go. And so
Sure.
it was a little scary initially to see Olympian and then to watch him sort of just fail out spectacularly was also kind of made me think, oh, okay, well, let's just see how this goes. And then I went and, I'm in game mode. I kind of go into my fugue state, my quizzing fugue state, and ended up, winning that initial round and thinking, okay, well, this is not too bad. And so the only downside of it is that because I had advanced past that initial round, I had to stay an extra day in Los Angeles to film the final championship show. And I remember I actually don't remember. My husband likes to remind me. I called him and I was so annoyed. Because I had planned to come home, on a Thursday, and now I had to come home on Friday. And I got to stay in Los Angeles for an extra day. And what are the odds that I'm even going to win the big money? I'm not going to win the big money. And then of course I did end up winning the big money.
What a wonder! And the total winnings, if my notes are correct here, $300,000.
Yeah, I won 50,000 in my initial round. And if I remember correctly, that's because in that Circle of Samurai intermediate round, I answered 2 additional questions. And there were some people who went into the championship portion who had answered 4 correct questions in Circle of Samurai. And so they were, considered the front runners. They were the top of the pecking order. And then I, as a $50,000 winner, was sort of in the middle. But again, that has its pros and cons as well. I think it's good, or at least I have always learned by observing especially as an only child, like, no one is telling me how these things work. You just have to kind of watch. And so I find it helpful to, have a few other people go first, and then I will go and, hopefully do learn from what I have observed and do even better. And it worked out. But yeah, it was a really cool experience. That one I liked. I'm sure I'm not gonna top it, knock on wood, but it was, I've always with every game show said, if this is it, Dayenu, like it is enough. And that is true after the chase. And then, oh, I got on Jeopardy. Well, great. And then, oh, I got on Mental Samurai. And then, oh, I got on You Bet Your Life. Like, it's just, I try to treat each one as a wonderful surprise and gift, even though I search for casting notices and want to get on these shows, but I never sort of demand of myself that I get on another game show. If it happens, great. If not, what a wonderful experience I've had.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the way I look at it as again as somebody who's been fortunate enough to have that experience more than once, I feel fortunate even having the first one. Anything else after that is I didn't ask for it, but it's wonderful. Thank you so much. And like you said, if it's the last one, cool. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, and people who sort of put all their chips in the one basket, like, they want to get on Jeopardy, and I'm not going to be on any other game shows so that I don't ruin my Jeopardy eligibility. And then, well, what if Jeopardy never happens, And I'm like, take the opportunities that are offered, and never turn them down. Or, if you think you'd be a good match for the show, go out for it, because maybe you get on, like I did, you get on Jeopardy and then it's not what you had hoped for.
Right.
And if that's, you had committed yourself, I'm going to be on Jeopardy and only Jeopardy. Well, and then you finish last on Jeopardy, and then you shut yourself off to game shows forever. That's no good. Don't do that.
Well, like you said earlier, take the game show now, not the game show in the future. I think that's incredible advice for anybody who is really into this thing and has done more than one show and maybe has a couple things on the table. I find myself in similar positions where I have to decide whether I want to hold out for this show or just go on this one. And I've never regretted just going on the show.
Yeah, I look at it as with everything in life, nothing is guaranteed, right? And
Oh,
so,
sure.
take the thing you got.
Tell me how your win on Mental Samurai changed your life. That's a huge amount of money. What were you able to see or do or obtain or acquire for yourself as a result of that win?
Yeah, it was one of the times where, they always ask you, so if you won money here today, what would you do with it? And I got to actually live out those dreams. So one of the big things, and I talked about this on the show, was I wanted to do something for my hometown library, the Milwaukee Public Library. And that was my third place growing up. I didn't hang out at the playground. I didn't hang out at the arcade. I hung out at the library. I've always been an avid reader. And I feel like the books and the movies and the talking with the librarians is a big part of who I am today and kind of shaped me into the grown-up that I've turned into. And so I wanted to give money back to the Milwaukee Public Library as a sort of thank you, in addition to the tax dollars that my parents paid for many years, just as a thank you to the library. And that was a weird call to make, because how do you sort of approach that? But there's a sort of philanthropic organization that works with the Milwaukee Public Library. And so I connected with them, and they, I'm sure, thought it was a prank call at first, but I was able to donate money to the Milwaukee Public Library, and they were so gracious. They unexpectedly named a activity room, a community room at the branch that I went to as a very little kid. They put my name on it. It says Gift of Heather Hurley, at the Tippecanoe branch of the Milwaukee Public Library. And, I didn't demand that. I certainly didn't expect any sort of recognition, but they were so kind to recognize my donation in that way. And it was really important to me. I gave a lot of money, but it was really important to me. And it was one of those things that when I thought about, okay, if I just get this insane amount of money, what is a crazy thing that I could do? And I mean, I say crazy, but I don't mean it pejoratively, because it was absolutely when my mind just went right to it. And I was like, oh, I know that is a thing that I want to do. And so of course that elicits, oh, how generous from everybody. And I'm not doing it for that reason. That's just a cause that I feel really, really strongly about. And it was absolutely sort of the first thing on my list. And it worked out wonderfully. And then of course the second thing on my list was the sort of fun bonkers thing, which was I wanted to do a big trip to Antarctica. I have been fortunate enough to had been to 5 of the continents, but I had never been to South America or to Antarctica. And going to Antarctica logistically is very complicated, as you can imagine. It costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of time. You can't just, do that in short order. You have to really very carefully plan that out. And it costs a lot of money to go to Antarctica. It certainly costs a lot of money to do it the way that I wanted to do it, which was through National Geographic and Lindblad Expeditions, which is a company that advertises a lot on Jeopardy. Like growing up, and maybe they still do, they sort of give away trips and partner with Jeopardy. And so to me, that was always like, the sort of nerdy tourist company, but they're not cheap. And so that is a thing that I would not really have been able to do without this sudden influx of money. And then, of course, this sudden influx of money that I got was in very late 2019/early 2020. And as we all know, travel of any kind, and certainly adventure travel to continents with a lot of biological complications of like delicate flora and fauna that we don't want to give COVID to, that was sort of there was a whole long window of no trips, or do I really want to go on a trip to Antarctica when people are still potentially getting COVID and our ship turns into a sort of floating pandemic barge? And so I didn't really feel like I could actually take the trip until January of 2023, which is when I took it. And look, life-changing trip. Absolutely recommend it to anybody. But I understand that it's not the kind of thing most people can do. And so how lucky am I that I was able to do it because of Mental Samurai, way back in 2019.
For sure.
So those are my 2 big things. But I would be remiss not to tell people, a lot of it went to taxes. A lot of it went to boring things. Don't forget the taxes and the boring things, people who win money. You see a lot of dollar signs. You think, oh man, that person won $1 million. And I always yell at my television, save half of it for taxes.
That's right. As a famous poet once wrote, mo money, mo problems.
Yes, absolutely.
What is your big takeaway from having visited Antarctica? I've never talked to anybody who's been to Antarctica before. What information do you leave with? What's your takeaway?
The thing that struck me most and completely unexpectedly was you really see the impacts of global warming at the extremes. So we went on a route that our guides and our boat captain, who are there all the time, multiple times a year for years and years, they said a few years ago, this route that we are sailing around the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula would have been completely iced over at this time of year. In January, you would not have been able to get any kind of ship in this area. But in January of 2023, as far as the eye can see, it's just water. It's just liquid water. And we had a number of, because the trip was very sort of education and science focused, we had a number of biologists and marine biologists on the ship who were experts in penguins or seals or birds or whatever type of wildlife we might encounter, whales, that kind of thing. And quite a few of them were really concerned with each other because they kept saying, there's no carpenter seals. Where are the carpenter seals? Now, the tourists like me would have no idea what we're missing, right? We look out, oh, there's no carpenter seals. Well, I wouldn't even realize they're missing because look, there's penguins over there and there's an Arctic tern over there or whatever. But the biologists were all really alarmed that they didn't see certain animals, or when we would pass a penguin colony and there wouldn't be any chicks. To the tourists, again, we just see, holy cow, there's 1,000 penguins over there. That's amazing. But a biologist looks at that and says, when we came last year, this colony had hundreds of chicks. And we're here this year and there are no chicks. And that's really bad for the future of the colony. And, in Antarctica, a water that is a degree or 2 warmer or 4 to 7 degrees warmer is a huge deal. And it's not such a deal in Arlington, Virginia, or in, Tucson, Arizona, or in even, Alaska or whatever. But when you're at the places where the ecosystem is so sort of on the extreme, there are big impacts with global warming. And I'm, certainly not an environmentalist, and I still use single-use plastics and all those terrible things. But it makes you realize when you go to an environment like that, how the climate is changing and how things are shifting, and how when you read in the news about glaciers calving off and stuff, like that has big impacts in Antarctica. And so while the wildlife was wonderful and the vistas were beautiful and it was a great time, it also I left a little bit concerned sort of for our planet, and glad that I was able to see it when I did, because I now think that, in perhaps a few years from now, going to Antarctica will be a very different experience, and maybe less biodiverse and less wonderful than it is now.
Wow. That's such a sobering reminder of.
I know it really is, right?
Oh
Like
my
happy
God,
vacation, but also, oh my goodness, global warming. But,
Yeah,
I mean,
incredible.
yeah, again, it was a wonderful time, and I definitely don't want to sell that part of it short, but it kind of, it left me in a different, resonated with me in a different way than I expected, and that was really interesting. And again, part of why I like to travel, because it sometimes is the unexpected things that happen, or things that you see or whatever, that leave the biggest mark on you.
Tell Us About Yourself, Conversations with Game Show Contestants, is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Christian Carrion, from my studio in beautiful downtown Lancaster City, Pennsylvania. Co-executive producer Cory Anotado. Researcher Chuck Donegan. This has been a production of BuzzerBlog, the most popular game show website in the world, in partnership with the National Archives of Game Show History at the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. For more information, visit museumofplay.org. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Christian Carrion. Good night. Tell Us About Yourself, Conversations with Game Show Contestants is produced in partnership with the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, one of the largest history museums in the United States, and one of the leading museums serving families with highly interactive exhibits and programs. Since 1968, the Strong Museum has been dedicated to exploring the ways in which play encourages learning, creativity, and discovery, and how it illuminates cultural history. And their National Archives of Game Show History. Founded by industry veterans Bob Bowden and Howard Blumenthal, the archive is home to thousands of artifacts representing over 80 years of broadcasting, including props, set designs, video interviews with game show professionals, and other iconic elements from the history of television at play. For more information about the National Archives of Game Show History or the Strong National Museum of Play, visit museumofplay.org or call area code 585-263-2700. Tell Us About Yourself is sponsored by bonusround.ca, streaming Canada's classic game shows on demand. Dive into the golden age of television with thousands of episodes of Canadian series that defined an era from anywhere in the world, all for just $1.99 a month. From iconic shows like Let's Make a Deal and Definition to cult classics like Bumper Stumpers and The Mad Dash, bonusround.ca brings you timeless entertainment that's fun, enlightening, and affordable. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, relive the magic of Canadian television history. Subscribe now at bonusround.ca for $1.99 and turn every night into game show night. And by The Inn at Leola Village. Nestled in the heart of picturesque Pennsylvania, The Inn at Leola Village is a sanctuary of luxury and relaxation. Indulge in the timeless beauty of their historic suites, each meticulously designed to transport you to a bygone era of elegance and grace. Experience the culinary delights of their award-winning Italian restaurant, where every dish is a masterpiece crafted from the finest local ingredients. From romantic getaways to corporate retreats, the Inn at Leola Village offers a haven for every occasion. Unwind at the spa, stroll through the lush gardens, and let the stress of everyday life melt away. Make your reservation today at theinnatleolavillage.com or call the front desk at area code 717-656-7002. The Inn at Leola Village, an oasis of luxury.